Hello and welcome back to the Sonic Collective at thesoniccollective.com. I'm Darren Scott and I'm joined today with my partners in crime. As usual, I have Alan Dupuis from Calgary, Scott Gregory from Calgary, and all the way across the pond, our friend in Bangkok, Thailand, Scott Coates. How you doing, guys?
What up?
Doing well.
Awesome.
Good.
Awesome. Yeah, we're staying busy during COVID. I guess recording a podcast now is a good idea because then you can just stay at your computer and get to talk to people.
Right.
Yeah.
We were doing it before it was the socially mandated.
All right. Well, let's dive into this month's pick. And this time we had decided to do a random category. So we picked rap. We didn't pick it. Scott Coates at the magic generator of goodness. And it came up with, hip hop or rap? Hip hop. Same diff, I guess. Well, that's the thing. So yeah, I won't get it. Let's not get into that. But anyway, I started this off and I kind of got thinking about it. One thing I thought, because I actually really like the genre, I wanted to kind of go back to the roots a bit. And I don't know what the other members are going to do, but I got to go first. So I decided, why not try and pick something that maybe was a seed that helped grow hip hop into what it is today. So kind of in my research, and I had stumbled across the song a few times and known it, was Scott-Heron's The Revolution Will Not Be Televised was the name of that particular song that I had heard, but it's on this Pieces of a Man album. Actually, that particular song was on his first album, but more in a spoken word format. So when he brought it over onto Pieces of a Man, he basically produced it into more of a musical piece. So this album was really, it came out in 1971, I guess I should say that. Scott-Heron is no longer with us. He passed in 2011. I think he's about 62, but he was a spoken word. He was a poet first. He was a writer and poet first, and then got into spoken word recordings with usually just like really lo-fi instrumental in the background, a lot of just kind of congos and drums and things like that. And if we kind of take a step back for a second before I throw it over the other guys, I'll just do a little bit of rap and history. And I kind of learned a bit that there's different roots of rap, where hip hop and rap came from in that music. But a lot of it, of course, you'll hear from church and pastors. Beginning of rap was called Griot, which is weird, like Griot. And it was really how back then it was people actually close up in the government, but they would be storytellers. This is pre-technology, and they would usually just show up and tell stories of history and maybe praise somebody or degrade the enemy, and it was usually in kind of a spoken word type of format. And same thing, somebody might be playing drums or things in the background. So they think that's kind of where that all started, and then it kind of when slavery happened and Black people were brought over, they kept some of that in their culture, and then it kind of spread into what will become, spoken word, and especially to rhythm with spoken word. So anyway, I'm kind of beating around the bush, and I don't want to necessarily go first, even though I want to hear from you guys. So I'm going to kick it over to Alan. What do you think of this album, man?
All right. Scott-Heron. I really liked it. To me, it was like a trip back in time to a specific time and place. And that's something I've said many times in the past on this podcast, but these recordings are really, you can look at them almost like a time capsule of what's happening in the artist's life and how society as a whole is kind of reflected through this artwork. So like listening to this, and sonically it kind of reminded me of like those blaxploitation films and the cliche porno music kind of a thing. But when you start looking at the lyrics and you can see this guy is in a lot of pain. He is like, he's going through some shit. And you can't help but empathize with that, and everything he was singing about, even if it wasn't necessarily in first person, sometimes he was storytelling, but you couldn't help but think that he was speaking from the heart. And just a really fascinating trip sonically for me to take. I listened to it a number of times. I really liked the first half of the album, but after Pieces of a Man, it kind of started to wane for me a little bit in terms of how much I enjoyed it. And there were some songs that were actually kind of painful to listen to. Specifically the song Peace. This was an era before auto-tune. So there were times when he was just singing off key. And I think there was like a really awful harmony in there. And there was like some disharmonic pitch action going on. It kind of actually hurt my ears. But yeah, I think the first half of this album was really strong. My favorite track probably would have been Lady Day and John Coltrane.
Yeah, great track.
Yeah, it was a banger. I really liked Home Is Where the Hatred Is. That one, from a content perspective, is really dark. It's a good insight into what this guy was going through. And then, of course, I got to throw love at The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. I didn't necessarily enjoy it musically, but just knowing this is like the prototype for conscious rap. And, I've heard numerous rap and hip hop artists kind of pay homage to The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. I had seen that, spray painted everywhere many times before ever having heard of Gil Scott-Heron. So yeah, really interesting pick. I definitely enjoyed it. And I'm curious what Scott Coates thought.
Yeah, good one, Alan. I echo pretty similarly to you. The album grabbed me at the start because there's a DJ from San Francisco that makes mixes a couple of months, and probably a decade or so ago, one of his mixes in it had the spoken word for The Revolution Will Not Be Televised over kind of a much faster beat. And I always wondered what that was from, and I really liked it. And then so this album started, I was like, oh, damn, this is the guy, because literally for a decade, I've been wondering where that came from. So I thought that was really neat as far as an opener for an album. Like it sets a stamp about what the album is about, right? Like he basically, it's kind of the cause, the statement of the cause right at the start. So great opener. Lady Day and John Coltrane, like, wow. I mean, the message to kind of stay healthy and positive. I mean, this guy's a real community leader. And in some ways, this album could almost be his platform if he was running for public office. And you mentioned a time capsule. Like, yeah, it reeks of a push for equal rights and black rights. I was thinking this was late 60s, early 70s, and I looked back on Darren's post, and yeah, 71. So it really is a statement of the time and a time capsule, which is neat. Overall, it's nice, but, Pieces of a Man, Sign of the Ages, Peace. I find a lot of them, like the middle to late section, kind of just sounded similar, and I found myself listening to it cooking or working, and I wouldn't have been able to differentiate the last 20 minutes I'd listened to. It wasn't bad. It was just, to me, kind of became awfully similar and repetitive. Toast to the People is a nice ender. Like, again, really sticking it to the man, unity, staying together. So I'm glad we listened to it. I liked it. You could easily put it on when you have people over for dinner or drinks. Not offensive, despite kind of some of the lyrics, but it didn't wow me, but it was interesting. It was good. Why don't I throw it over to the other Scott, Mr. Gregory?
Yeah, I really enjoyed this album. It kind of surprised me out of the gate because I don't know if Darren had told us ahead of time that it wasn't an actual rap hip hop album, but I came in expecting like some really early proto rap or something like that, right? And I guess it is proto rap, but then like the jazz flute starts, and I'm like, what is this? Yeah, so I have challenges really trying to connect with jazz in general, and jazz flute just is a total turnoff for me. So it was a struggle the first listen on the first 2 or 3 songs here, right? Well, I just really realized what I was getting into, but then like The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, that's clearly like Can't Hold Us Back, Public Enemy. They're sampled by so many people, or he is, right? Mm-hmm. I went to, and I think we should do this a couple times, whosampled.com. This guy has 10 tabs of people who have sampled him, including Rihanna, Kanye, Kendrick, Drake, Common, Travis Scott, tons of people.
Kanye loved him so much he played at his funeral.
Oh, well, there you go. I really started connecting later on, and I know he's not speaking to my experience, but I think the song in particular, Pieces of a Man, today, like listening to it right now and just being in this constant fear of being laid off and getting a letter myself and having a son and stuff like that, and just how devastating it would be to me to hear him singing about that in a time when it was all too common. That shattered me for a second, right? And I can see that with a lot of these songs, that people are going through all of these things. He's speaking to common experience, and someone's going to catch on each one of these songs, right? And I think that's its power, is him as a lyricist. He's just really connecting right down to the bone and marrow of what was going on then. And I think we're back into a period where we're talking about racial wealth inequity, all these types of things. And I think he's really accessible to another generation of people out there. Individually, I did like The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. It was fairly unique. I could not get into Or Down You Fall. It's that flute just killed me, especially when it starts mirroring the look. I think I've mentioned before how I don't like it when the drums start mirroring whatever the vocals are. It's even worse with the flute. So game over on that front for me. But I think I'll Call It Morning. I really like it when he just really slows down, but also when he gets a little whimsical. And I got into that side of the jazz side when we pulled it up. It just really seemed like a perfect pairing with his voice on that one. So yeah, I think I'll Call It Morning is my favorite song on the entire album. Home Is Where the Hatred Is. He gets a lot of props for that out in the industry and stuff like that. And echoing Alan's sentiment there, that you can really feel the emotion coming out of his voice. And I think that is most evident on this song here. And it's strangely upbeat. And then you actually stop and you listen to what the lyrics are, and you're like, oh my God, this is horrible. What's going on here? So, and I think that's the strength of his vocals too, is that a lot of the background music playing behind him, it could be fast, it could be slow. I don't know if it would really impact the strength of the song, right? Like, I feel his lyrics are just so strong that he could tweak them and really pull it off in either direction. I'm just in awe of his writing and his voice over top. It's just so dominating that the music almost seems secondary to it. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure this thing out. And that's, I think, a positive, right? It's been a month with this thing, and I'm still pulling strings on it, and different stuff is happening. So I'm glad you picked this. I can see the fingerprints of artists, or him in other people, his fingerprints in other albums all the way up through the decades. And it's pretty cool to track it back to the source of the river.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting input. And I share a lot of the same thoughts too. I think I maybe liked it a little bit more than you guys. I really like the genre. I really bought into the story of it. I think one thing too is it's hard to put yourself back in 1971. None of you were alive. I was probably not quite two. But really at the time, I mean, the funk was really starting to get popular, and James Brown was kind of just in the groove here, and great style. But he kind of took funk, soul, jazz, and smashed it all together. And I think at that time, it sounds familiar now because I think it's that type of sound has been expanded on, but at the time they weren't really fusing those styles, right? And secondary, and I think one thing that's important, especially if we're talking about hip hop, or I guess more, rap especially, but is really the voice of Black America especially, and the frustration, and I know it's worldwide, but in this particular instance, we're talking about the United States and where it happened. There's a good quote, I'll post it, but just daysdigital.com. And he said, "I saw some shit that needed to be spoken on and nobody was speaking on it. So I just said it." And I mean, I think that was his thing. He just wanted to really get out there. And he was quite political his whole life. He was in and out of jail for drug charges, mostly weed, which is stupid now. But, and he made an album later in life too. I have that. It's really good as well. But always political. And funny enough, a lot of people, like he just died in 2011, so fairly recently. And rap was obviously quite big by then. And they would often call him, one of the grandfathers of this art form. And he actually shunned that. He didn't like it because he actually didn't really like a lot of rap. He hated the misogyny. He hated look at my mama, look how much money I have. He hated all that. He really liked the political stuff, like you mentioned, Public Enemy, and even like Grandmaster Flash, like that genre that came out and really started telling the stories from the street. But he actually he doesn't like that style of rap that's just, I guess, fun, stupid. He was really he thought that they should be using that more as to have a voice. Brian Jackson was a piano player, and you mentioned his singing, and Alan, I know being someone can sing, he caught that. But really, this was the first time he had tried singing. He hadn't really done that before. He was just doing spoken word. So, I guess he got through it pretty good considering. But yeah, it definitely, I guess it added to the style.
I've heard worse.
I can't sing. Yeah, and I mean, I really like that strife. If you think like Nina Simone and artists like that are often also sampled in hip hop a lot, but same thing because of their strong political message, and they were genius musicians, especially somebody like Nina Simone. I don't know music that well structurally, but one thing I kept coming across, they said, especially the revolution will not be televised. They said the structure and the formula that the song was actually chunked together, how the chorus bridge, however that worked, they said became really a template for hip hop. So even though we might not be able to distinguish it, I guess that structure and how that was written really kind of started to come through and how they would piece together these songs. Yeah. So, he called it bluesology, the science of how things feel. That's what he referred to his own style, which is kind of interesting. But anyway, I liked it. Maybe I'll just go first with the scores and then pass it on. For me, this was all fours. I gave it a 4 for influence. I didn't know him that much at the time, but I see the stamp on the influence, and I always have liked that kind of music. I would recommend it, same thing, a 4, especially if you like soul, jazz, and early hip hop, things like that. Maybe if you're a hardcore rap fan, you'll have trouble going back and figuring out how this was rap. But I guess the revolution will not be televised, but the rest of the album you'll be like, what? So that just leads to a 4 overall. All right, Alan, what about you?
I would say I would give it probably a 3.5 all around. Maybe a 4 for influence, not because it influenced me directly, but it definitely obviously influenced so many of the artists that I appreciate to this day. So really solid.
Great. Scott, C?
Just before my review, you kind of got me thinking about something when you were saying these sounds probably hadn't been heard altogether in that way. And I kind of wonder, how crazy and dangerous did this music sound at the time, right? Because it's super mellow. But I remember I had an Ice-T Power poster on my wall when I was a kid, and it had his wife in a skimpy bikini. I think that was a main point my mom objected to. But kind of the whole persona of that, and my parents weren't racist, furthest thing from it. But I can definitely know that that album and that poster, parents were against it. So I bet you there was a ton of whiteys that if they heard the first song on this album would be like, holy shit, the Black Panthers, Black Power, and just be fearful and turn it off. So, I mean, I bet you it really was something at the time. For influence, I don't think it influences me. I'll give it a 2.5 because it's not going to send me down a spoken word rabbit hole or anything. I'd recommend it. I'd give it a 3.5 to someone that's really kind of interested in soul or rap. Overall, I'll give it a 3.5. I don't see myself coming back to it too often, but I could maybe throw it on again while just doing something around the house. Enjoyed the experience. Glad we heard it. And we throw it over to Mr. Gregory now.
Yeah, so I kind of echo that, right? When you're talking about what it was in its period of time. I pulled up the Billboard Hot 100 singles for 71, and the top 5 are the Bee Gees, the Osmonds, Carole King, Rod Stewart, and Three Dog Night.
There you go.
So
this is a big departure from that.
Exactly, right? All of a sudden this comes out and they're like, hey, community, what are we doing to each other? Let's get our act together. Let's, do better. It's kind of what Scott said. That would be the biggest fear for a lot of racist and other stuff going on out there, right? I think as far as scores, influence, I'm going to go to a 4.5 just because even though it is that secondary influence that we've all talked about, I've mentioned before Public Enemy, Rage Against the Machine, a number of these really political hip hop, rap, metal type groups I'm super into. And I see his fingerprints all over the place on those guys, right? So if you're into them, you should really check this guy out. What I recommended, I'll drop back down to a 4, which is still a really good score, right? Like, I don't think all of these songs are going to make your playlist. Nothing with a flute that in the foreground should make your playlist, but there's at least 3 or 4 songs that it's like cilantro. You're still going to taste it a little bit, but it won't be so much that you won't actually go for it. Overall, if you're not into rap and hip hop, probably, unless you're into flute, I'll give it a 3. But if you do like rap and hip hop, then that bumps up to a 4. And you need to give this a listen if you really want to understand the history of where your genre is coming from.
Another point just before we close off here that came up is they credited to the beginning around this same time. I already mentioned about James Brown, and actually not his songs, but James Brown was notorious for his skits in between songs where they would just keep playing the drum and he'd be like, all right, audience, I'm getting hot, and he would just keep going and the band would just keep playing and he would just keep rapping. And the second one that they mentioned that I got a kick out of, and I brought up one and I'll do it, is Muhammad Ali. So if you think of all his stuff, and they said really like he was an early like poet kind of rapper. And there's one here, there's a whole bunch, you can Google them and I'll post it too, but it's like, I'll even try and do it in the accent. But you think the world was shocked when Nixon resigned? Wait till I whoop George Foreman's behind. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. His hand can't hit what his eyes can't see. Now you see me, now you don't. George thinks he will, but I know he won't. I done wrestled with an alligator. I done tussled with a whale. Only last week I murdered a rock, injured a stone, hospitalized a brick. So I make medicine sick. Love it. Screw the brick. But yeah, Ali, there's so many of those. I love that. I remember that when I was a kid, Ali's little rants. And like, you had to love the guy for that. I got speed and endurance. You'd better increase your insurance.
We saw a bunch of that on the Dr. Dre album. Actually, a lot of the hip hop albums we review, they seem to have these little skits, these interludes. So I guess that's probably where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good point. Anyway, Scott Coates, you're up next. So I guess you're picking for May. Wow. We never reveal it here. So come back the first of the month, May 1st, on our website, soniccollective.com, or any podcast platform, and that pick will be up. Any closing thoughts, Scott, or anybody else?
Yeah, sorry, this has nothing to do with this album, but I was listening to a Rolling Stone Best Live Albums podcast a couple of weeks ago, and they had rock ones, and then one of them just threw in Sinatra Live at the Sands, which we reviewed at one time. Yeah, and I went back and listened to it, and I still love, you're talking about Ali rapping, is like how for about 8 minutes in the middle of that, Frank just does a stand-up routine. Like, it's great. And
I have that on vinyl. It sounds beautiful. It's nice. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah.
A really fun album. I had a fun time listening to it again. And just even how he comments to people in the audience. He says something about like, why look so sad, baby face, or something to some woman. But anyway,
yeah, it's awesome. All right. Well, I'll take us out. So thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed Pieces of a Man by Gil Scott-Heron. We thought we'd add one more Scott to the mix. So that's 4 Scotts in this review, 3 of the reviewers and the artist. But yeah, Scott Coates is up next, and join us at thesoniccollective.com or any of your favorite podcast platforms to learn more about all your favorite artists and influential albums. Out. All because they're so afraid to say that they are